Fine. So let's see. So it is about the 5-step model when it comes to the revenue recognition. As we discussed in the last class, you can remember that the most important, what do you call that, the change that has introduced in this SLFRS 15, the revenue from construction contract with customers, it's about the 5-step model. So in that, we have discussed some of the aspects in brief, I would say, and thereafter we start looking at the things in detail. So in the last class, finally, we discussed about the first step. It's about identifying the contract with the customer. So now you know how to identify the contract with the customer. So today we are going to looking at identify the performance obligation in the contract. Right. Identify the performance obligation in the contract. So in the simple terms, the performance obligation in the sense, it is promise goods and services. It's promise goods and services. The performance obligation means the promises in a contract to transfer goods or services to a customer. It's promises in a contract to transfer goods or services to a customer. So in the last class, I took an example. We take that the Colombo Dockyard PLC is selling a ship together with a service contract to Sri Lanka Navy. So in that, we identified as per the contract, there are two performance obligations. One is about delivering the ship or selling the ship. The second one is about providing the maintenance service after 1 year's time or something, right? So it's about the performance obligation. So therefore, performance obligation in a simple sense, that is the promised goods and services. The performance obligation may be explicit, implicit, or based on customary business practices. So when it comes to the performance obligation, so if you are entering into a contract, especially if it is unwritten, so then you know for sure the performance obligation may be explicit. There it mentioned the performance obligation. Is that so? My voice is not clear, no? Okay, so let me switch off the video. Sometimes then the problem would be solved. Right, how about now? So it shows that it's fine, the connection is fine. Now how about now? දෙපතාල් පැහැදිලිද ඇහෙනවද? Still the problem is there? Or is it not there now? Yes? Would like to hear you. Can you all hear me now fine? Right. Still not. Okay. Fine. It's not clear, no? Yeah. Then, so I have switched off the kind of mic. Sorry, I have switched off the video even, but it's still the problem there. For me, it shows that the connection is fine at the moment. I do not know what to do with that. Now okay, right? Okay, fine, good. Right. So let's see. එතකොට පුතාලා අපි කතා කරමින් හිටියේ මේ performance obligation ගැන. එතකොට contract එකක තියෙන performance obligation කියන්නේ සරලවම කිව්වොත් ඒ contract එකේ agree වෙලා තියෙන goods සහ services. That's what we call the performance obligation. So it says that again, it's not clear, no? So now it shows that the connection is now not stable or something. The performance obligation may be explicit, implicit, and based on the customary business practices. But your performance obligation explicit වෙන්න පුළුවන්, implicit වෙන්න පුළුවන්, ඒ වගේම customary business practices මත base වෙන්න පුළුවන්. So when it comes to the explicit performance obligation means, especially if you have a written contract, in that contract, clearly it would mention what are the promised goods and services. So for an example, if you take the contract what we discussed, the the Dockyard PLC is selling a ship to a Sri Lanka Navy together with the service contract. There you can see the ship that is to be delivered and the maintenance service, those are explicitly mentioned. But in some cases, so you might find that the performance obligation may be implicit or based on the customary business practices, especially if the contract may come into existence because of by way of oral contract or implied contract. So most of the time performance obligations may be implicit. Say for an example, if you simply go to a supermarket and purchasing a good and offering that to pay the money in that, the performance obligation is the delivery of that particular good, but it is not explicit, but it is implicit, right? So you are simply giving that and you are getting the good. So likewise, the performance obligation can even be implicit. So the performance obligation කියන එක සෑම වෙලාවකම explicitම වෙන්න ඕනේ නැහැ. සාමාන්‍ය formal written contract එකක් තිබුණොත් ඒකෙදි අපිට පේනවා performance obligation explicitly අඳුර ගන්න පුළුවන්. හැබැයි තවත් සමහර අවස්ථා අපි දන්නවා contract එකක් කියන එක ඇඟවීමෙන් නැති වෙන්න පුළුවන්. contract එකක් කියන එක ඇති වෙන්න පුළුවන් වාචිකව. ඒතකොට මේ වගේ අවස්ථාවල performance obligation explicit නැහැ. නමුත් ඒක performance obligation තියෙනවා. දැන් සුපර් මාකට් එකට ගිහිල්ලා අපි භාණ්ඩයක් මිලට ගැනීම හිතුවොත් අපි හිතමු මොනවද soft drink එකක් මිලට ගන්නවා. ඒතකොට ඒ වෙලාවේ performance obligation එක මොකක්ද කියන එක explicit නැහැ. නමුත් අපි දන්නවා ඒ භාණ්ඩය දීලා ඒ භාණ්ඩයට අදාළ මිල අපි ගෙවුවාම ඒ භාණ්ඩය අපිට ලැබෙනවා. එහෙනම් ආයතනයේ පැත්තෙන් තියෙන performance obligation එක තමයි to deliver that soft drink, bottle of soft drink. ඒතකොට ඒක implicit. ඒ වගේම තවත් සමහර businesses වල customer business practice එක තීරණය වෙනවා මොනවද තියෙන performance obligation. උදාහරණයක් විදිහට යම්කිසි භාණ්ඩයක් වික්කහම ඒ භාණ්ඩෙට අදාළව යම්කිසි service එකක් provide කරනවා නම් free services කියලා අපි කියනවා. ඒ වගේ දෙයක් customer නම් ඒකට ඒවත් ඇත්තටම performance obligation. ඒකට අපි හිතමු you are purchasing a kind of motor vehicle or something. So in that, most probably you may be having a kind of contract. But even in the absence of a formal contract, you would find that they are there to offer some free services. So some free services, that is simply the customary business practice of that particular industry. So when it comes to the automobile industry, it is quite customary for them to sell product with a service. So still the problem is there, Buddha? Or can it manageable now? Can you manage that? Going fine, right? Okay, right. Right, thanks. Then we are going to see if goods or services are distinct, it requires to account for each performance obligation separately. When it comes to this performance obligation, in some instances, you would find that you can distinctly identify the performance obligation. Say for an example, what about selling the ship together with the maintenance service? There you can identify the sale of good separately and the maintenance service separate. The sale of ship and the maintenance services are not interrelated, interdependent, so they can be explicitly identified. So they are distinct. They are not interdependent of each other. අපි ගත්තොත් performance obligation සමහර performance obligation තියෙනවා ඒවා අතර interdependency එකක් නැහැ. ඒ වගේ වෙලාවට අපිට පුළුවන් එක් performance obligation එක වෙන වෙනම අඳුනගෙන account කරන්න. දැන් උදාහරණයක් විදිහට අපි අර ship එක වික්කේ maintenance contract එකත් එක්ක. ඒතකොට එතනදී ship එක විකුණන එක අපිට වෙනම අඳුන ගන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ වගේම maintenance service එක වෙනම අඳුන ගන්න පුළුවන්. So it requires to account for each performance obligation separately. So if you can distinctly identify each performance obligation, that must be accounted for separately. But there can be instances when it comes to the performance obligation, they are not distinct. Simply putting, they are interdependent and interrelated. So you would find that when it comes to certain contracts with customers, you would find that there would be some goods or services that are or the promises are interdependent and interrelated. So in such kind of situation, what you have to do is that those performance obligation should be combined and reported as a one performance obligation. If you find the performance obligations are interdependent or interrelated, in that particular instance, you cannot consider each separately. So consider the performance obligations which are interdependent and interrelated as a combination and then do the accounting. So that is what it is expected. So if I want to give you an example for that, what about selling a particular kind of plant, particular machine, right? So let's say that for your business organization, you are purchasing a plant, you're purchasing a particular machinery. So in that, in order to use that, the seller or the provider should come to the business premises of the customer and they should install the particular machine. The particular machine must be installed. So therefore, if you consider this particular contract, you can see that two performance obligations are apparent. The one is to sell the machine. The other one is to install the machine. Sell the machine and install the machine. So you can see that those are two performance obligations. But when it comes to the usability of that particular machine, without the installation, the customer cannot use that machine. So therefore, in order to bring that to a usable condition, the seller should install that particular machine. Hence, though there are two performance obligations, you cannot consider them as separate. You must consider them as interrelated and interdependent. That is what you have to do. මෙතන අපි කතා කරේ again the problem is there, no? Yes. So even I could show that so that is the failure of the technology. So that's the failure of the technology, right? So maybe because that there may be several classes in progress in this Zoom application, that could have been the reason. So they can't help, so do not know how to proceed. So let me just, so how about now? So is it still the case? The condition is there. How about that? Now is it fine or still the situation is there? Can you hear me now? Fine. Or still the situation is there? No, okay, right, okay, fine. So when it comes to එතකොට දැන් අපි පුතාලා කතා කරමු හිටියේ performance obligation distinctively identify කරන්න පුළුවන් වෙලාවල් තියෙනවා. එතකොට ඒ වගේ වෙලාවට අපි කරන්නේ ඒ performance obligation වලට වෙන වෙනම account කරන එක. එතකොට ship එක විකුණලා ඉවර වුණාම අපිට පුළුවන් ship එකේ revenue එක recognize කරන්න. ඒ වගේම maintenance services provide කරපුවාම අපිට පුළුවන් maintenance services වලට අදාළ revenue එක recognize කරන්න. performance obligation separately account කරනවා කියන්නේ ඒකට. එතකොට සමහර performance obligation තියෙනවා ඒවා distinct නැහැ. ඒවා interrelated, interdependent. එකිනෙකට බැඳිලා තියෙන්නේ එකිනෙක හා depend වෙනවා, interdependent and interrelated, right? එතකොට ඒ වගේ දෙයකට උදාහරණයක් කිව්වොත් දැන් අපි හිතුවොත් අපි යම්කිසි machinery එකක්, plant item එකක් මිලට ගන්නවා ව්‍යාපාරයට. එතකොට ඒ වගේ වෙලාවක අපිට පේනවා ඒ plant item එක ව්‍යාපාරයට මිලට ගත්තට ඒක use කරන්න බෑ. ඒක අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම ඒ service provider නැත්නම් ඒ ආයතනය මේ භාණ්ඩ සෙල් කරන ආයතනය ඇවිල්ලා ඒ මැෂින් එක ඉන්ස්ටෝල් කරලා දෙන්න ඕනේ. එතකොට ඒ ඇග්‍රීමන්ට් එක ගත්තොත් අපිට පේනවා performance obligation දෙකක් තියෙනවා. එකක් තමයි item එක සෙල් කරන එක, අනිත් එක තමයි item එක ඉන්ස්ටෝල් කරන එක. හැබැයි ඇත්තටම මේක අපි කස්ටමර්ගේ පැත්තෙන් බැලුවොත් කස්ටමර්ට යූස් කරන්න බැහැනේ මේක ඉන්ස්ටෝල් කරන්න නැතුව. එතකොට අපි මේක true performance ව්‍යාපාරයේ පැත්තෙන් මේක performance obligation දෙකක් කියලා හඳුනගෙන account කරන එක realistic නැහැ. ඇත්තටම ආයතනයේ risk and rewards transfer වෙන්නේ customerට ඔය machine එක අපි install කරලා දුන්නට පස්සේ. එහෙනම් ඒ point එකේ තමයි අපි ඇත්තටම revenue එක recognize කරන්න ඕන. ඒක තමයි අපි interdependent or interrelated performance obligation කියලා කියන්නේ, right? Let's put it through an example and see whether you are getting that. A software development firm enters into a contract with a customer to transfer the following. Software license. Software, it's a license, basically the installation service, including changing the web screen for each user, software update, and technical support for 2 years. The entity sells the above options separately. So when it comes to their business organization, they would be selling these options separately. The installation service is routinely performed by other entities and does not significantly modify the software. So when it comes to the installation services, that is even routinely performed by other entities as well. The software remains functional without the updates and the technical support. Still, without the technical support or the update, you can use the original software. Now the question is that, are the goods or services promised to the customer distinct in terms of SLFRS 15? Whether these goods are distinct or not. Whether these goods and services are distinct or not. That's a question. මෙතන තියෙන goods or services distinct නැද්ද කියන කාරණාව තමයි අහන්නේ. By looking at the conditions that is mentioned, so you must come up with an answer. By looking at the condition given, would like you to attempt that first. Give it a try. මේ ප්‍රශ්නේ කියනවා software development firm එකක් ඉන්නවා. ඒතකොට මේ software development firm එක customers ලට provide කරන යම් services තියෙනවා. software license විකුණනවා, installation services දෙනවා, software updates දෙනවා, technical support provide කරනවා. එතකොට මේ entity එක enter වෙලා තියෙනවා contract එකකට customer කෙනෙක් එක්ක. ඒ contract එක යටතේ මේ customerට මේ services ඔක්කොම දෙන්න බැඳලා ඉන්නවා. customer කෙනෙක් full package එකක් විදිහට තමයි මේක ගන්නෙ. right? ඒකට software එක ගන්නවා, installation service ගන්නවා, software update එක ගන්නවා, technical support එක අවුරුදු දෙකකට අදාළව ගන්නවා. ඒකට මේක full package එකක් විදිහට ඔන්න purchase කරනවා customer. එතකොට මේකේ condition මේ contract සම්බන්ධය තවදුරටත් පැහැදිලි කිරීම කරනවා. ඒකට සාමාන්‍ය ව්‍යාපාර කටයුතු වලදී මේ entity එක sells the above option separately. සාමාන්‍යයෙන් සෑම වෙලාවකම මේක පැකේජ් එක විදිහට විකුණන්නේ නැහැ. සමහර අවස්ථා තියෙනවා සමහර customers ලැබිලා මේ options වෙන වෙනම අරන් යනවා. සමහරු software එක අරන් යනවා. සමහරු installation services ඉල්ලනවා. සමහරු updates ඉල්ලනවා. ඒ වගේ. ඒ වගේම the installation service is routinely performed by other entities and does not significantly modify the service. तर මේ installation service කියන එක උනත් entity එකම provide කරන්න අවශ්‍ය නැහැ. අනිකුත් ආයතනත් මේ installation services කරනවා. ඒ වගේම software එක update සහ technical supports නැතුවත් වැඩ කරනවා කියන එක තමයි කියන්නේ. එහෙනම් මේ තියෙන circumstances එක්ක අපි consider කරොත් what about these goods or services promised in this contract? Are they distinct or are they not distinct? That's a fundamental question that you need to answer. Yes, one of you have tried that and yes, very correct. So you have mentioned it very correctly. So it is obviously depending on the given facts, you can decide the goods and services or the performance obligations are not distinct. Performance obligations are distinct, sorry. Performance obligations are distinct. That is in the sense they are not interrelated and interdependent. එතකොට මේකේ දීලා තියෙන circumstances facts එක අපි බලපුවාම අපිට පේනවා මේ එක් promise වෙච්ච good එක එහෙම නැත්නම් service එක ඒවා distinct. මොකද ව්‍යාපාරයේ සාමාන්‍යයෙන් මේ එක් options වෙන වෙනම විකුණන වෙලාවල් තියෙනවා. එහෙනම් මේවට අපිට stand alone prices හොයාගන්න පුළුවන්. මේ එක් promise එකට අදාළ මේ එක් performance obligation එකට අදාළ stand alone prices අපිට හොයාගන්න පුළුවන්. ඒකට එහෙම stand alone prices හොයා ගැනීමක් පුළුවන්කමක් තියෙනවා නම් අපිට පුළුවන් වෙනවා මේ එක් performance obligation එකට separately count කරන්න. ඒ නිසා මේවා distinct, interrelated සහ interdependent නැහැ. ඒකට as per the given facts, so those performance obligations are distinct. Yes, each performance obligation is distinct. It's not highly dependent or interrelated with other promises in the contract. It requires to account for each performance obligation separately, right? So that is the consequence. You need to account for them separately. Each performance obligation is distinct. It is not interrelated or interdependent. Let's look at another activity. The Techno Private Limited enters into a contract with the customer to provide a customer relationship management software. Okay, the Techno has entered into a contract with the customer to provide a CRM software, customer relationship management software. In addition to providing software, Techno Private Limited promises to perform consulting services by extensively customizing the software to the customer's IT environment. So you are not just selling this particular software, but also the Techno Private Limited involves in customizing the software to the customer's IT environment. The total consideration of the contract is 900,000. The question is, are the goods or services promised to the customer distinct in terms of SLFRS 15? So now what I want you to do, identify the performance obligation and decide whether these performance obligations are distinct or not distinct. So මුලින්ම අඳුර ගන්න බලන්න performance obligation මේකේ තියෙන පුතාලා ඊට පස්සේ decide කරන්න මේක distinct ද නැද්ද කියන කාරණාව. So first tell me what are the performance obligation that you have over there. Then the performance obligation මොනවද කියලා කියන්න බලන්න. Okay, provide the CRM software. Okay, good. Yes, that is exactly one performance obligation that is there. You are correct in identifying one performance obligation. What is the other? Perform consultancy services by extensively customizing the software. Yes, very correct. Yes, the first one, it's about selling the customer relationship management software or providing that. And the second thing is it's about the customizing the software to the customer's environment. So therefore, here basically two performance obligations are there. Very correct. Now, the question is, these two performance obligations are distinct or not distinct. Decide that. Make it distinct the non-distinct. Because you know that it has an implication on accounting treatment. It has an impact on the accounting treatment. Because if the performance obligations are distinct, you need to account for each performance obligation separately. If the performance obligations are not distinct, you need to consider the performance obligation as a whole and account them considering as a one performance obligation. Distinct goods or services are these two performance obligations. It's distinct, is that? Not interdependent. Okay. Okay, good attempt. Your attempt is appreciated. You see that there are no interdependence between these two performance obligations. Okay, good. Are there any other bits? Not distinct. Okay. Right. So there are basically two views. Right. Good. Appreciate the attempt and we'll see what it is. Yes. What do you mean by this interdependent and interrelated? So if I just go back to my previous example, the example what it was there previously, there what it had said that think about selling a particular machine to your business. Particular supplier is selling a machine to you, right? You're purchasing a machinery item to your business. And when come to this machinery item, just after purchasing that, as the business, you cannot use that because it's a kind of specialized machinery. That particular machine has to be installed. and that particular expertise is not with you. The installation has to be performed by the provider. So that is the seller or the supplier. The supplier should install that. Once that particular machine is installed, the customer can use that particular machine. So if you consider about that particular contract, in fact, there are two performance obligations. One is to deliver the machine. The other one is to install the machine. So there are two performance obligations. But if you consider when it comes to the revenue recognition, so soon after selling the machine, can this supplier recognize the revenue? No, they can't. The simple point is that the machine is becoming to a usable condition only after the installation is performed. So therefore, there are two performance obligations. They are not distinct. They are not distinct. They are simply interrelated. Only after performing the installation, the supplier can recognize the revenue. So therefore, though there are two performance obligations, when it comes to the accounting, you find that they are not distinct. So then you need to consider the two performance obligation as a one and then do the accounting. එතකොට අපි යම්කිසි price එකක් ගෙවනවා මේ machine එකට. එතකොට installation එකටත් එක්කමයි අපි මේක ගෙවන්නේ. එතකොට ඒ revenue එක recognize කරනවා. අපි හිතමු මිලියනයක් ගෙවුවා කියලා machine එකට installation එකටත් එක්කම. එහෙනම් මේ මිලියනයම අඳුනගන්නේ මේ machine එක install කරාටත් පස්සේ. දැන් කලින් example එකේ අපි ship එකක් විකුණනවා ඒත් එක්කම maintenance service එකක් දෙනවා කියන එක distinct නේ. ship එක විකුණන එක වෙනම අඳුන ගන්න පුළුවන්. ship එක විකුණාට පස්සේ customer එක භාවිතා කරන්න පුළුවන් නේ. ඊට පස්සේ ඒකේ ප්‍රශ්නයක් නැහැ. එහෙමනම් එතනදී risk and rewards transfer වුණා customer ship එක use කරනවා. අපි ඒකට revenue එක recognize කරනවා. ඊට පස්සේ maintenance service එක දෙන්නේ අවුරුද්දකින් පස්සේ. එතකොට maintenance service එක දුන්නාට පස්සේ maintenance service එකට අදාළ revenue එක recognize කරනවා. ඒකට ඒ විදිහට අපි හිතුවොත් මෙතන Techno Private Limited එකට පුළුවන් ද CRM software එක වික්ක ගමන්ම revenue එක recognize කරනවා. ඒක බෑ. මොකද හේතුව මේ software එක වික්ක පමණින් මේ customer ට මේක use කරන්න බෑ. ඒ software එක industry එකේ market එකට හදන එකක්. එතකොට ඒක customize කරන්න ඕනේ. ඒක tailor made කරන්න ඕනේ. requirement එකත් එක්ක customer ගේ IT environment එකේ. එතකොට customization එකක් කරන්න නැතුව customer ට මේක use කරන්න බෑ. එහෙමනම් මේ ලක්ෂණ 9 අපි recognize කරන්නේ කොතනද? software එක විකුණලා software එකේ installation එකත් software එකේ customization එකත් ඉවර වුණාට පස්සේ. එහෙම නැතුව performance obligations දෙකක් තියෙනවා කියලා මේ දෙක අතර බෙදලා යවන්න බෑ. ඒක තමයි implication එක. එතකොට එහෙමනම් මෙතන අපිට පේනවා මේක not distinct. Those are interrelated and interdependent. Performance obligations are interrelated and interdependent. There are two performance obligations, but they are not distinct. They are not distinct because the Techno Private Limited needs to extensively customize the software to the customer's IT environment. Then only the customer can use it. Therefore, the two performance obligations are combined and reported as one performance obligation. For the purpose of accounting, you consider there you have a one performance obligation. That is to sell the CRM and customize it. Considering the whole, take it as a one performance obligation. After performing the customization, you are eligible to recognize the revenue of 900,000. So it's about the performance obligation, which are not distinct. So දැන් පුතාලට පැහැදිලි වෙන්න ඕනේ performance obligation එකක් distinct වීම හා නොවීම තුල තියෙන implication. Performance obligation distinct නම් ලැබෙන consideration එක ඒ performance obligation අතර බෙදනවා. ඒක not distinct නම් එහෙම බෙදන්නේ නැහැ. එකටම ගන්නවා, right? Okay. Fine. Good. Now let's move on to the third step. So far we have discussed about two steps. The first one is about the identifying the contract with the customer. The second one is about identifying the performance obligation. Now we are coming to the third step. It's about determine the transaction price. You need to consider what is the price that you are going to charge in this contract. That's what we call the determining the transaction price. The transaction price, the amount of consideration in a contract which an entity expects to receive from a customer in exchange for transferring promised goods or services. The amount of consideration in a contract which an entity expects to receive from a customer in exchange for transferring promised goods or services. Simply putting, the consideration or the price what you would receive for transferring promised goods or services. When you take a particular contract, in that contract, there can be several performance obligation. The performance obligation in a simple sense, promised goods or services. For transferring these promised goods or services, how much would you get? Going back to the original example, so you are selling a ship together with the maintenance contract. For considering all the promised goods and services, you agree that you want a consideration of 110 million. ඒකට අපි කතා කරපු example එකේ අපි දැක්කා performance obligation දෙකක් තිබ්බා. dockyard වික්කා ship එකක් maintenance contract එකක් එක්ක ශ්‍රී ලංකා navy එකට. එතකොට මේ contract එකේ price එක විදිහට charge කරා මිලියන 110ක්. එතකොට මේ මිලියන 110 කොහොමද determine කරේ? good එක සහ services. ඒ කියන්නේ performance obligation ටික ඔක්කොම consider කරලා තමයි ඒ price එක determine කරේ. In a transaction price කියන්නේ මේ සියලුම performance obligation එහෙම නැත්නම් promised goods or service transfer කිරීම වෙනුවෙන් ලැබෙන මුදල. An entity shall consider the terms of the contract and its customary business practices to determine the transaction price. So you need to basically consider about the contract. So in the contract, there I mentioned what are the performance obligation or what are the promised goods or services, and depending on that, you should decide the price. Similarly, even in instances where you do not have a formal written contract, just by referring to the customary business practices, you should identify what are the promised goods or services. So for an example, selling an automobile. In selling automobile, if a formal contract is not there, still, depending on the industry practices, you know that the service is a must. So a particular customer may be entitled for a kind of free services or something. So in that, the services are there, and also the selling of good is there, selling of automobile is there. So considering everything, a particular consideration has to be agreed. So කියනවනේ ඔය දැන් අපි ගොඩක් වෙලාවට සෑම වෙලාව භාණ්ඩයක් මිලට ගන්නකොට අපි හිතමු ආයතනයකට AC machine එකක් ගන්නවා, නැත්නම් ගෙදරකට අවශ්‍ය වෙන හිතමු washing machine එකක්, නැත්නම් refrigerator එකක්, TV එකක්, මේ මොක ගත්තත් මේ හැම එකක් එක්කම කියනවා free services තියෙනවා. අවුරුද්දක් යනකම් මේකට free services අපි දෙනවා කියන එක. laptop එකක් ගත්තත් එහෙමයි. නමුත් එහෙම කිව්වට ඒවා free services කියලා ඇත්තටම ඒවා free services නෙමෙයි. ඔය අදාළ භාණ්ඩේ මිල කියලා charge කරන්නේ ඔය කියන services සුත් consider කරලා. So ඇත්තටම ඒවා free services නෙමෙයි, අපි භාණ්ඩේ මිලට ගන්න වෙලාවේ ඒ services වලටත් pay කරලා තමයි තියෙන්නේ. ඒ ඔක්කොම consider කරලා තමයි price එක charge කරන්නේ. ඒක business tactic එකක්, ඒක marketing tactic එකක් විදිහට තමයි එයාලා කියන්නේ මේකේ තියෙන free services කියන. ඇත්තටම ඒවා free නැහැ, right? So that is just for your knowledge. But what the point that I want to make that when it comes to a contract, considering all the promised goods and services, the consideration need to be decided. When a performance obligation is satisfied, an entity shall recognize the revenue, the amount of the transaction price allocated to that performance obligation. And as we identified, when there are several performance obligations, when and where you satisfy the performance obligation, each performance obligation, you should recognize the corresponding revenue. So going back to the original example, you have sell the ship together with a service contract for 110 million. So this is for the service as well as the delivery of the ship. Soon after delivering the ship, out of the total consideration, you can identify part of that. As per example, we had to recognize 100 million for the ship. Then 10 million, that is for the service. Once you deliver, once you perform the maintenance services, you can recognize that 10 million. So once, when and where you satisfy the performance obligation, you should recognize the revenue. It says that when come to this transaction price, it is usually a fixed amount of consideration. It's a fixed price. So therefore, it's quite straightforward. So you have a kind of fixed price. So then it's just a matter of dividing this consideration among the separate performance obligation. So ගොඩක් වෙලාවට transaction price එක fixed price එකක්. එතනදී අපිට සිද්ධ වෙනවා මේ fixed price එක performance obligation අතර බෙදා ගන්න. But it may sometimes include variable consideration or non-cash consideration. What is that? Variable consideration. The price is not fixed. Sometimes when it comes to this consideration, you may be eligible for a consideration which would vary depending on the future circumstances. Depending on the future events, the consideration would vary. For example, something like that. So you purchase, you enter into a particular contract with a customer, right? Let's say that you are the business, you enter into a particular contract with the customer, and you're selling a particular product. Say that you're selling smartphones, you're selling smartphones. And when you enter into the contract, you say that the price of a particular mobile phone that you sell, say 40,000. Usually, the selling price of a mobile is 40,000. But you mention in the contract, during a particular year, during a particular calendar year, if this customer purchase more than 1,000 units, we would charge rupees 30,000 per mobile phone. එතකොට මේ වගේ contract එකක් තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. අපි විකුණනවා mobile phones. අපි මේක model එකක් අපි මොනවා හරි කරන්නේ. මේ model එක අපි විකුණනවා රුපියල් 40000ට තමයි විකුණන්නේ. හැබැයි යම්කිසි customer කෙනෙක් එක්ක අපි contract එකට agree එන්න වෙනකොට අපි කියනවා ඒකේ contract එකේ අපි දානවා clause එකක් විකුණන්නේ රුපියල් 40000ට තමයි එකක්. හැබැයි යම්කිසි කාල පරිච්ඡේදයක අපි මිලට ගන්න phones ප්‍රමාණය 1000කට වඩා වැඩි වුණොත් යම්කිසි calendar year එක කරන purchases 1000කට වඩා වැඩි වෙනවා. calendar year එකක් කියන්නේ ජනවාරි 1 වෙනිදා පටන් ගෙන 12:30 කින් ඉවර වෙන අවුරුද්ද. ඒකට calendar year එකකින් ඇතුළත units 1000ක් ගත්තොත් 1000කට වැඩියෙන් ගත්තොත් අපි එක phone එකකට charge කරන්නේ රුපියල් 30000යි. ඒ වගේ දෙයක්. එතකොට අපිට වෙනවා ඒක depend වෙන්නේ අනාගතයේ සිද්ධ වෙන දෙයක් එක්කනේ. ඒකට අනාගතයේ ඒ මිලට ගන්න phones ප්‍රමාණය 1000ට වඩා වැඩි වුණොත් අන්න මුළු consideration එකම අපි adjust කරනවා. right? ඒකට ඒක තමයි අපි estimate change එකක් වගේ තමයි තියෙන්නේ. ඒකට අපි කාර්තු පදනමකට අපිට බලන්න පුළුවන් consider කරලා ඒ adjustments සිද්ධ කරනවා. අපි ඉස්සරහට කතා කරනවා මේ වගේ example එකක්. So at the point, just to give you a kind of idea, when it comes to the variable consideration, it is simply the consideration would vary depending on the future circumstances. And non-cash consideration, what is that? Non-cash consideration is simply you may be selling goods and you would be accepting even the consideration other than cash. So for an example, you may accept the inventory from the customer. So therefore, your consideration is inventory. Or sometimes you may accept the shares of another entity. So that is also a non-cash consideration. Likewise, you may be accepting a consideration which is not cash. That is called the non-cash consideration. Now let's look at the variable consideration. Variable consideration is a consideration of a contract depends on future events. Contract එක තියෙන consideration එක future events මත depend වෙනවා නම් ඒකට තමයි අපි කියන්නේ variable consideration එකක් කියලා. For example, there can be discounts, there can be refunds, price concessions, performance bonuses, rebates, credit, incentives, penalties. So these are different kinds of terms what we use, right? එතකොට ඒ වගේ ඩිස්කවුන්ට්ස් තියෙන්න පුළුවන්, මිල අඩු කිරීම තියෙන්න පුළුවන්, ඒ වගේම පෙනල්ටිස් charge කරපු ඒවා තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. වගේ විවිධ දේවල් include වෙනවා. එතකොට ඒක තමයි අපි කියන්නේ variable consideration එකක් කියලා. අපි සරලව හිතමු අපි අර කලින් ගත්තා වගේ උදාහරණයක් අපි ඒකක 1000කට වඩා වැඩිපුර විකුණුවොත් මිලට ගත්තොත් යම් කිසි කස්ටමර් කෙනෙක් අපි එයාට රුපියල් 30000 ගන්න තමයි charge කරන්නේ. ඒතකොට අපිට එතන අපි දීලා තියෙනවා ඩිස්කවුන්ට් එකක්. එතන අපි ඩිස්කවුන්ට් එකක් දීලා තියෙනවා යුනිට්ස් ගාන මත බේස් වෙලා. එතන ප්‍රයිස් කන්සෙෂන් එකක් දීලා තියෙනවා යුනිට්ස් ගාන මත බේස් කරලා. If the consideration is variable, an entity estimates the amount of the consideration and it will be included in the transaction price only if the following two conditions are satisfied. If your consideration is variable, consideration is a variable now, entity should estimate the amount of the consideration. Entity එකට සිද්ධ වෙනවා තමන්ගේ consideration එක estimate කරන්න. And it will be included in the transaction price. ඒක transaction price එකේ include කරනවලු පහත කොන්දේසි දෙක ඉෂ්ට වෙනවනේ. The entity has experience with similar contract and can estimate the cumulative amount of revenue. Entity එකට experience එකක් තියෙනවා මේ වගේ contracts සම්බන්ධයෙන්. They have entered into a contracts of this nature even in the past. So they have some experience in that. And based on this experience, it is highly probable that there will not be a significant reversal of previously recognized revenue. The previously recognized revenue වල significant reversals සුත් තියෙන්න බැරිලු. ඒතර මොන වගේ කාරණාවක්ද? ඒතර අපි ගමු අර basic example එකම. So there's a particular business entity, they would sell the mobile phones and they are selling the mobile phones, say rupees, they would be selling that mobile phones for rupees 40,000 per unit. But at the same time, they mentioned that during a particular calendar year, if they sell more than 1,000 units, they would be charging rupees 30,000 per unit. So that is the contract is about. Now let's say you are in the first quarter of 2020. You are in the first quarter of 2020. That is in the sense from 1st of January to 31st March. 31st March 2020. So අපි හිතමු අපි ඉන්නේ දැන් 2020 පළවෙනි කාර්තුවේ කියලා. During that particular quarter, say that you sold 100 mobile phones to that particular customer. Then when you are recognizing the revenue in the first quarter, and let's assume that your reporting period ends on 31st March, so therefore you need to recognize your revenue. When it comes to recognizing the revenue, you need to have a kind of estimation. You need to do that. What is that? You need to decide by looking at the first quarter performance, whether this particular customer is going to purchase, whether this particular customer is going to exceed the 1,000 threshold during the reporting period. So in that, what is your estimation? In the first quarter, this particular customer has purchased 100 mobiles. Then for one quarter, if it is 100, then it is highly unlikely that for the rest of the 3 quarters, they may not purchase more than 1,000. So they may be purchasing something around 500 or something. तर මේ වගේ වෙලාවක අපි කරන estimation එක තමයි අපිට පේනවා පළවෙනි කාර්තුවේ විකුණලා තියෙන ෆෝන් 100නේ. එහෙනම් කාර්තුවකට 100ක් වික්කොත් ওই විදිහටම නම් ওই කස්ටමර් දිගටම purchases කරන්නේ අපිට පේනවා ඉතුරු කාර්තු තුනෙත් තව 400ක් ගත්තා. තව 300ක් ගත්තත් ඒක 1000ට යන්නේ නැහැ. නම් පේනවා අපිට reasonably ඔය කියන කස්ටමර් අර threshold එක 1000 threshold එක achieve කරන්නේ. අන්න ඒ වගේ estimate එකක් අපි කරගත්තට පස්සේ අපිට පුළුවන් price එක charge කරන්න. දැන් අපි දන්නවා ඔය customer කීයටවත් eligible වෙන්නේ නැහැ 30,000 කියලා. එහෙනම් 40,000 ගත්තා. 40,000 into 100 units recognize your revenue at that value. That's it. ඒ විදිහට තමයි අපි variable consideration එක recognize කරන්නේ. එහෙනම් පළවෙනි කාර්තුවේ ආදායම 40,000 වැඩි කරා 100න් එතකොට ලක්ෂ 4යි මිලියන 4ක් වගේනේ. මිලියන 4ක් අපි ආදායමට අඳුන ගන්නවා. right? එතකොට ওই විදිහට අපිට සෑම කාර්තුවකටම අදාළව කරන්න පුළුවන් estimation එකක්. අපි හිතමු second quarter එකේ මේ customer ඔන්න purchase කරනවා පාට මෙයාට sudden demand එකක් ඇවිල්ලා මේ product එකට මේ phone එකට phone model එකට අපි හිතමු units 500ක් purchase කරා කියලා. By the end of the second quarter, by the quarter ended 30th June 2020, the particular customer would purchase another 500 units. Then what is the situation? Now you can see in the first quarter they purchased 100, but in the second quarter they purchased another 500. Altogether 600 in the first 2 quarters. Then there is a likelihood that within the next 2 quarters they may purchase something similar to that, thereby they would exceed that particular threshold. That particular 1000 threshold would be exceeded. So therefore, when you are going to recognize the revenue in the second quarter, you should not take 40,000 for phone, you should charge 30,000. You should charge 30,000 for mobile phone into 500 units, and that is your revenue for the second quarter. Not only that, in the first quarter, you recognize your revenue at 40,000. So therefore, you need to deduct 10,000. So 30,000 multiplied by 500 minus, in the first quarter, it was 100, 10,000 multiplied by 100. And whatever the amount that you get there, that is your income. So එතනදී කොහොමද අපි account කරේ? අපි කිව්වා දෙවෙනි කාර්තුවේ මේ customer 500ක් mobile phones මිලට ගත්තා. දෙවෙනි කාර්තුවේ 500ක් ගත්තොත් අපිට දැන් පේනවා quarters දෙකක් ඉවර වෙනකොට ඔක්කොම 600ක් phones මිලට අරගෙන තියෙනවා. එතකොට phones 600ක් මිලට අරගෙන තියෙනවා නම් දැන් අපිට හිතන්න පුළුවන් නේද reasonably ඔය customer ඉතුරු කාර්තු දෙකෙත් ඔය වගේ විදිහට purchase කරොත් අර 1000 threshold එක පණි. ඒ වගේ estimate එකට අපි ආවොත් අපි මොකක්ද කරන්න ඕනේ? දෙවෙනි කාර්තුවේ revenue එක අපි recognize කරන්න ඕනේ 50,000 sorry ඒකක 500 වැඩි කරනවා. දැන් 40,000 නෙමෙයි අපි වැඩි කරන්න යන්නේ. දැන් අපි 30,000න් වැඩි කරනවා. එහෙනම් ඒකක 500 30,000න් වැඩි කරලා ඔන්න දෙවෙනි කාර්තුවේ ආදායම් විදියට ගන්නවා. හැබැයි ඒක විතර ප්‍රමාණවත් නැහැ. පළවෙනි කාර්තුවේ අපි revenue එක recognize කරේ කීය ගානද? ඒකක 100ක් එකක් 40,000 ගන්න. එහෙනම් 100 වැඩි කිරීම 40,000 විදියට පළවෙනි කාර්තුවේ revenue එක recognize කරා. අන්න දැන් අපි estimate change එකක් කරන්න සිද්ධ වෙනවා. පළවෙනි අවුරුද්දේ recognize කරපු revenue එක වැරදි. පළවෙනි කාර්තුවේ recognize කරපු revenue එක වැඩි. එහෙනම් second quarter එකේ අපිට පුළුවන් වෙනවා අපි කරන්න ඕනේ 10,000ක් වැඩිපුර අපි recognize කරා එක ඒකකයකට. එහෙනම් 10,000 වැඩි කිරීම 100 එතන එනවා ලක්ෂයක් මිලියනයක්. ඒ මිලියනය දෙවෙනි කාර්තුවේ ආදායමෙන් අඩු කිරීමක් කරනවා. එහෙනම් when it comes to the revenue of your second quarter, it has to be 30,000 multiplied by 500 minus 100 multiplied by 10,000. And that is your estimation. So therefore, this is more or less the estimate would come into play. In the event the variable consideration is there, you may need to consider about the use of estimates. In order to do that, you have to have the prior experience, and also you should be sure that the revenue that you had recognized previously should not be significantly reversed. In this instance, you have seen that there was a kind of reversal, but we can say that it is not a significant reversal. So it's just like 1 million reversal. 1 million reversal. So අපිට පේන මේ අවස්ථාවෙත් අන්න reversal එකක් තිබ්බ revenue එකේ. නමුත් ඒක අපිට significant amount එකක් කියලා ගන්න බෑ. right? පළවෙනි අවුරුද්දේ revenue එක පළවෙනි කාර්තුවේ revenue එක අපි මිලියන 4ක් අඳුරගත්තේ. දෙවෙනි කාර්තුව වෙනකොට ඒකෙන් මිලියනයක් reverse වුණා. ඒතකොට ප්‍රතිශතයක් විදිහට ගත්තොත් 125ක revenue එකක් තමයි reverse වුනේ. ඒ නිසා ඒක අපිට consider කරන්න පුළුවන් significant නැහැ කියලා. එතකොට සාමාන්‍ය percentage එක අඩු නම් ඒක අපි significant නැති reversal එකක් විදිහට ගන්නවා. Most ideal would be like 10% or something, but here 25% is still, you can consider it as kind of not that much significant. Right, okay, let's put it through an example, then it would be more convinced. මේ example එකක් කරලා බලමු. එතකොට පුතාලට මේක තවදුරටත් පැහැදිලි වෙයි. The Comfort Bed Private Limited enters into a contract with the customer on 1st of January 2020 to sell beds for rupees 4,000 each. So the Comfort Bed had entered into a contract with the customer on 1st of January 2020 to sell beds for rupees 4,000 each. If a customer purchased more than 1,000 beds in a calendar year, including prior purchases of the same year, the contract states that the price per unit is reduced to 3,800 per bed. Right. ඒකට අර අපි කතා කරපු තත්ත්වය වගේමයිනේ. ජනවාරි පළවෙනිදා contract එකකට එන්ට වෙනවා. ඇඳක් විකුණනවා 4,000 ගානේ. හැබැයි යම් කිසි අවුරුද්දක ඔය කියන customer ඇඳන් 1000ට වඩා විතර ගත්තොත් එකකට 3,800 ගානලු අය කරන්නේ. As of 31st March 2020, so that is at the end of the first quarter, the company had sold 80 beds to a customer. Customer විකුණලා තිබි පළවෙනි කාර්තුවේ beds 80යි. Therefore, it estimates that the company purchase will not exceed 1,000 bed threshold required for the volume discount in the calendar year. So, එහෙනම් අපිට පේනවා පළවෙනි කාර්තුව අවසානයේ අපි estimate එකක් කරලා බැලුවොත් පළවෙනි කාර්තුවටම මිලට අරගෙන තියෙන්නේ 80යි. ඒ නිසා අපි දන්නවා මේ අවුරුද්දේ කීයටවත් 1,000 bed threshold එක නම් exceed කරන එකක් නැහැ කියලා. That is your reasonable estimate at the end of the first quarter. Then it says that at the beginning of June 2020, June මාසෙ වෙනකොට, the Comfort Bed Private Limited acquired another company. The Comfort Bed, they have acquired another company. With this strength, the company has been able to sell an additional 500 beds to the same customer during the second quarter ending 30th June 2020. The Comfort Bed, අපේ seller, අපේ entity එක අපි acquire කරන තව company එකක්. එතකොට ඒ strength එකත් එක්ක අපිට පුළුවන් වෙනවලු ඔය කියන customer ටම තවත් ඇඳම් 500ක් විකුණන්න දෙවෙනි කාර්තුවේ. පළවෙනි කාර්තුවේම අපි 80යි වික්කේ. හැබැයි දෙවෙනි කාර්තුවේ ඔන්න දැන් අපි 500ක් වික්කයි customer. Considering the new fact, the Comfort Bed now estimates that the customer's purchase will exceed the 1,000 bed threshold for the calendar year. දැන් එතකොට අපිට පේනවා පළවෙනි කාර්තු දෙක අවසන් වෙනකොට අපි 580ක් විකුණලා තියෙනවා. දැන් අපිට හිතෙනවා දැන් දෙවෙනි කාර්තුව අවසන් වෙන වෙලාවේ මේ threshold එක exceed කරලා යයි කියලා customer. That is your reasonable estimate at the end of the second quarter. Then the question is, decide whether the consideration of the contract is variable or fixed. පළවෙනිම decide කරන්න වෙනවා contract එකේ consideration එක fixed the variable ද කියලා. The second thing is that revenue to be recognized for the first quarter and revenue to be recognized for the second quarter. Right. පළවෙනි කාර්තුවේ revenue එක, දෙවෙනි කාර්තුවේ revenue එක. So would like you to attempt that first. Take say 5 to 10 minutes. විනාඩි 5ක් 10ක් අරගෙන පුතාලා ඒක attempt කරන්න බලන්න and indicate your answer. The answer එක indicate කරන්න බලන්න chat එකේ. Give it a try. Okay, the first one, the consideration is variable, very correct. Why is that? So when you look at the circumstances given in the question, so as per the circumstances, it would suggest that the consideration depends on the future event. What's that particular future event? If the customer purchases more than 1,000 beds, the customer is eligible for a reduction in price that is 3,200 to 3,800 per bed. So therefore you can see that 200 discount per bed is there. So therefore your consideration is variable. Justification, consideration depends on the future event. Consideration depend වෙනවා future event එකක් එක්ක. ඒක තමයි ඇඳන් 1000ක් විකුණනවා කියන කාරණාව. Right, very correct, first one. Then how about the second one? Okay, let's see. So it has to be, yes, very correct. So in the first quarter, when you come to the end of the first quarter, your assessment is, it is unlikely that during the period, during the calendar year, you may not exceed 1,000. The customer may not exceed 1,000 threshold. So if that is the case, you can simply take 80 multiplied by 4,000 and take that to your revenue. Yes. So the revenue for the second quarter should be 4,000 into 80. It's 1, 2, 3, 4. 8 into 4, it's 32. It's 320,000 or something. Yeah, it's 320,000. The revenue is going to be 320,000 for the first quarter. Then how about the second quarter? What's the revenue that you should recognize for the second quarter? Now try that out. Let's just give it a try. Okay. So it's going to be, okay, 500 into 3,800, correct, minus 80 into 200. Yes, that's correct. Very correct. You are there. So when it comes to second quarter, you can see that in the second quarter, you have sold 500. Now, altogether, considering the first quarter and second quarter, you have ended up selling 580. If you had ended up selling 580, then you can see that it is now seems possible of exceeding the 1,000 threshold by the end of the calendar year. So if that is your reasonable estimate, then you should go and recognize your revenue not at 4,000 per each unit, but at 3,800 per unit into 500. So that is your revenue. So it is 3,800 into 500, but that is not just good enough because in the first quarter, you have recognized your revenue at 4,000. So therefore, you need to do a kind of reversal because you have agreed that for all the units you would purchase, you would charge 3,800 if it exceeds 1,000. So therefore, in the first quarter, you would have to reverse 200. That is the difference between 4,000 and 3,800 into 80 units. So thereby, it has to be a reversal. It's going to be total 1,884,000 or something. Let's see that. Yeah. The variable consideration, the revenue for the first quarter 320,000 and revenue for the second quarter 500 into 3,800 1.9 minus 80 into 200 16,000 altogether 1,884,000. Yes, you are perfectly correct. So right. So this is a little tricky, but if you understand that with a rationale, that's it. So if you need me to do any further clarification on this, would like to provide that, so you can question. Is that clear? Or you want me to explain further? තවමක පැහැදිලිද? තවදුරටත් පැහැදිලි කිරීමක් අවශ්‍යයි. Anything what we have discussed so far? Does that make sense? Yes, good question. Why are we deducting this 200 into 80? Yes, it's simply the fact, right? What I can do is, it's like this, right? The point, what it was there is that, so here the contract goes like this, no? So it says that during a particular calendar year, right? During a particular calendar year, if a particular customer purchase more than 1,000 units, then the business should charge 3,800 per bed for that particular customer. That is the contract, right? තොර යම් කිසි කාල පරිච්ඡේදයක, ඒ කියන්නේ අවුරුද්දක කැලෙන්ඩර් ඉයර් එක ජනවාරි 1 වෙනිදාන් පටන්ගෙන 2020 12 31 ඉවර වෙන අවුරුද්ද ඇතුළත යම් කිසි කස්ටමර් කෙනෙක් කරන purchases ඒකක 1000කට වඩා වැඩි නම් එතනදී එක ඒකකයකට අපි අය කරන්න ඕනේ රුපියල් 3800යි. You should charge only 3,800 per bed, not 4,000, right? Only if the purchases during the whole year exceed 1,000. අවුරුද්දක් ඇතුළේ කරන purchases 1000ට වඩා වැඩි වුණොත් අන්න charge කරන්නේ 3800යි. එතකොට කියනවා පළවෙනි ක්වාටර් එක ඉවර වෙනකොට. ඒ කියන්නේ by 31st March 2020 ඔය කියන customer මිලට අරන් තිබ්බේ beds 80යි. එතකොට අපි හිතුවොත් දැන් අපි ඉන්නේ පළවෙනි කාර්තුව අවසානයේ කියලා. If you reasonably assume, right? If you reasonably estimate, in the first quarter you manage to sell only 80. If you sell at the same rate, even for the next 3 quarters, you may be ended up selling like 250 or something units. So therefore, it is quite reasonable that you may not be able to sell more than 1,000 units for that particular customer. So therefore, now it is reasonable that you are not going to sell more than 1,000 units. So therefore, you can simply charge your customer 4,000, because only if the purchases are exceeding 1,000, you are ready to charge 3,800. Since it seems that it is not possible that the customer purchases will exceed 1,000, at the end of the first quarter, you would recognize that is 80 into 4,000, right? That is your revenue. But at the end of the second quarter, the circumstances has changed, and the comfort bed has managed to sell 500 units to the same customer during the second quarter. එතකොට second quarter එක අවසන් වෙනකොට second quarter එකේ පුළුවන් වුණාලු ඔය කියන කස්ටමර්ටම ඒකක 500ක් විකුණන්න. ඒතකොට දැන් අපි හිතුවොත් අපි ඉන්නේ second quarter එක අවසානයේ කියලා. මොකක්ද දැන් අපේ estimate එක? At the end of the first 2 quarters, you managed to sell 580 units. Then isn't it reasonable? Can't you reasonably assume that within the next 2 quarters, you may be selling something like that? And so therefore, it will exceed 1,000 units during a particular year. If that is the case, now the variable consideration would come into play, because now it is likely that you are going to exceed that 1,000 threshold in a calendar year. If that is the case, when it comes to the revenue, you should recognize all the units what you had sold at 3,800. So therefore, for the entire period you sold 580, your revenue must be 580 multiplied by 3,800. But the point is, for the first quarter, you have already recognized the revenue. That is recognized at 4,000 into 80, right? So that's what you have done. So therefore, in the second quarter, what you can do, you have 500, get this 500 multiplied by 3,800, 1.9 million. Since in the first quarter, you have recognized your revenue at 4,000 into 80, 320. So you need to do a kind of reversal for that. You have recognized your revenue something higher, right? So therefore, what you should do, that you should take this additional amount of the revenue that you had recognized, and you should deduct that in the second quarter. Then you have ended up recognizing the correct revenue. So it is 3,200 and 4,000, it's 200. The number of beds 80. So therefore, once you adjust that, you can see that your revenue in the second quarter had become 1.9 1.884 million, right? That's the story. They are not included in the 500. Then why we should deduct it from the 500 beds revenue? Shouldn't it be 580 into 3,800? So still you are not getting the point clear. එතකොට දැන් අපි හිතන්න මොනවත්ම අමතක කරලා දැන් සරල කාරණාවක් තියෙනවා. දැන් අපි පළවෙනි කාර්තුවේ දෙවෙනි කාර්තුව ඉවර වෙනකොට අපි හිතමු රෙවෙනියු එක මුකුත්ම රෙකග්නයිස් කරේ නැහැ කියලා. එහෙනම් දෙවෙනි කාර්තුව ඉවර වෙනකොට නම් රෙවෙනියු එක රෙකග්නයිස් කරන්න හිටියේ 500යි 80යි 580 3800 වැඩි කරලා තමයි රෙවෙනියු එක වෙන්න ඕනේ. right? ඔයා කියන කාරණාව හරි. I'm getting that. I do agree. ඒකට ඒ කියන විදිහට ඒක සිද්ධ වුණේ නැත්තම් first quarter එකේ සහ second quarter එකේ ඒ කියන්නේ 1st of January 2020 ඉඳලා 30th June 2020 වෙනකම් revenue එක කීයක්ද 580 units විකුණලා තියෙන 3800 ගානේ තමයි price එක වෙන්න ඕනේ. නිසා ඔයාගේ revenue එක quarters දෙක ඉවර වෙනකොට වෙන්න ඕනේ හරියටම ඔයා කිව්ව විදිහටම. Yes, that's correct. It's this much. That must be the cumulative revenue. This is your revenue. Revenue for the first 6 months. But in the second quarter, what is that? Now the situation is that it goes like this, no? From 1st of January 2020 to 31st March 2020, you have recognized from revenue. Now question එකේ තියෙන විදිහට දැන් අපි revenue එක recognize කරලා තියෙනවානේ. පළවෙනි කාර්තුවේ 80යි ඒක 4000න් වැඩි කරලා අපි දැනට යම්කිසි අගයක් පළවෙනි මාස 3 අවසන් වෙනකොටම recognize කරලා තියෙනවා. right? okay. එතන 320,000 recognize කරා. එතකොට second quarter එකේ ඒ කියන්නේ 1st of April 2020 ඉඳලා 30th June 2020 යනකොට තව ඒකක 500ක් වික්කා. එතනදී අපි 3800 ගානේ recognize කරන්න ඕන. 3800 ගානේ recognize කරන්න. එතකොට 500 3800 1.9 million. ඒක හරි. එතකොට දැන් අපි මේ දෙක එකතුවක් ගමු. එතන මේ දෙක එකතුව ගත්තොත් ඒකනේ පළවෙනි මාස 6 ඇතුළත revenue එක. ඒතර අපිට පේනවා එතන අන්න revenue දෙක tally වෙන්නේ නැහැනේ. ඒක වෙනස්නේ. අවසාන වශයෙන් මේක තමයි cumulative revenue එක 2.204. නමුත් මෙතන මේ විදිහට ගත්තොත් අපිට පේනවා 2.220. එතකොට වෙනසක් තියෙනවානේ. ඒ වෙනස එන්න බලපාපු හේතුව මොකක්ද? revenue එක අපි කලින් period එකේ 4000 ගාන තමයි charge කරන්නේ. එහෙනම් 200ක් වැඩිපුර charge වෙලා තියෙනවනේ මේ period එකට. එහෙනම් ඒ 200 අපි deduct කරන්න ඕනේ මේ 80 වලින්. right? මේ 80 වලින් 200 deduct කරොත් දෙවෙනි අවුරුද්දේ අන්න එතකොට අන්න 3800ම price එක තමයි පළවෙනි කාර්තුවටත් apply කරලා තියෙන්නේ. estimate change එකක් අපි කරන්නේ when and where it is identified නේ. අතීතයට බලපාන විදිහට කරන්නේ නැහැ estimate change. නිසා පළවෙනි කාර්තුවට ගිහිල්ලා ඒ අවුරුද්දේ revenue එක recognize ඒ revenue එක adjust කරන්නේ නැහැ. ඒ වෙනුවට කරන්නේ second quarter එකේ revenue එකට adjustment එක කරනවා. දැන් අපි adjustment එක කරපුවාම අපි cumulative impact එක බැලුවොත් මේක සමුච්චිත බලපෑම බැලුවොත් ඒ දෙකම අන්න tally වෙලා තියෙනවා. ඒ නිසා තමයි මේ 16,000 අපි එතන adjust කරේ. Does that make sense? Right. Good. So now we are making sense out of that. Right. I believe that even I have answered the question of the other one, right? Don't need to accumulate the total revenue for the third question. No, we don't have to accumulate the revenue. Why is that? Because this is two different periods. The question says that reporting period ends on 31st March. Make entity reporting period එක අපි හිතුවා 31st March ඉවර වෙන අවුරුද්දක් කියලා හිතන්න. එතකොට ඒක යන්නේ කලින් අවුරුද්දට. පළවෙනි කාර්තුවේ ආදායම යන්නේ for the year ended 31st March 2020. දැන් අපි ඉන්නේ ඊළඟ අවුරුද්දේ. ඊළඟ අවුරුද්දේ තමයි ඔය estimate change එක adjust කරන්නේ. එතකොට අපි ඒක අතීතයට බලපාන පරිදි කරන්නේ නැහැ. මොකද මේක estimate change එකක්. So current year එකට තමයි ඒකේ impact එක තියෙන්නේ. Right? Okay. Right. Now let's move to the next one. It's about the non-cash consideration. What about the non-cash consideration? Sellers sometimes receive consideration in a form other than cash. So simply putting, when it comes to the non-cash consideration, that is simply the consideration what you had received not in cash. For example, you may accept inventory. You may be selling goods to the customer. So in return, you may be accepting the inventory of the customer. So it's a non-cash consideration. When non-cash consideration is received, the revenue should be generally recognized at the fair value of what is received. You have received the inventory, you must get the fair value of the inventory, and that is your revenue. That's your revenue. That's a simple point. You know what is the fair value? We have extensively discussed that. That is, if you sell this inventory today, how much you would get. That is the fair value. So therefore, you must recognize your revenue at the fair value of the inventory what you get. Okay. The transaction, the time value of money. Again, simple extension of that. The transaction price is also adjusted for the effect of the time value of money. Even you have discussed about the time value when you are discussing about the we discuss about the liabilities, the provision, what goes beyond one reporting period, there you had to deal with the time value of money. So similarly, when it comes to the revenue, you need to do the same. If the revenue, the amount that is receivable would take more than one reporting period. The transaction price is also adjusted for the effect of time value of money if the contract includes a significant financing component and for any consideration payable by the customer. For example, the consideration is paid in advance or in arrears, and if it is significant to the contract, could be adjusted for the effect of the time value of money. Say that your business, you are selling goods today. You are selling rupees. You make a sale of say 1 million or something. Then you would say for the customer, okay, so I'll sell these goods to you today on credit. You can settle the outstanding amount in 2 years' time, something like that. So if the contract is of that particular nature, you would find that, so you are simply allowing the kind of customer a credit facility. For that particular credit facility, you may be charging something. So if you sell them today, the cash price may be 1 million. Since you are providing that with a kind of financing arrangement, so you would say that particular customer, you can settle the outstanding in 2 years' time. But you are doing a kind of business, right? You need not to make losses. So therefore, as you're offering a kind of facility, so it's a kind of financing facility for this particular customer, so you must be getting compensated for that. So therefore, you are selling goods for 1 million today, but in 2 years' time, probably you may be charging him 1.2 million or something. So that is to compensate the financing. The revenue is 1 million, the additional 200,000, that is the kind of finance income, right? එතකොට අපි ව්‍යාපාර කටයුතු කරනකොට මේ විදිහට අපි හිතමු අද රුපියල් මිලියනයක සේල් එකක් අපි කරනවා කියලා. ඒතකොට අද සල්ලි දීලා ගත්තොත් ඒක මිලියනයක්. ඒතකොට යම්කිසි කස්ටමර් කෙනෙක් ඉන්නවා. එයාට ඒ මුදල අද ගෙවන්න බෑ මිලියනයක්. ඒතකොට ඔයා කියනවා රයිට් බිස්නස් එක කියනවා ප්‍රශ්නයක් නැහැ. බාණ්ඩ අද ගන්න මට අවුරුදු දෙකකින් සල්ලි ගෙවන්නකෝ. You can settle your outstanding in 2 years time. අවුරුදු දෙකක්. අවුරුදු දෙකක් කියන්නේ සැලකිය යුතු කාලයක්. ඒතර මුදලට තියෙනවා කාල වටිනාකමක්, right? The money has a time value. So you must be getting compensated. ඒතර මෙතන ඔයා provide කරන්නේ යම්කිසි service එකක් නේ, credit facility එකක් දෙනවා customer ට. එහෙමනම් ඔයා අවුරුදු දෙකක් ගිහිල්ලා මිලියනයක් දෙන්න කියලා කියන්නේ නැහැනේ. අනිවාර්යෙන් ඊට වඩා වැඩි මුදලක් තමයි charge කරන්නේ. දැන් අවුරුදු දෙකකින් දෙනවා නම් මිලියන 1.2ක් දෙන්න කියනවා. ඒතර මිලියන 1.2ක් අවුරුදු දෙකකින් හම්බෙන එක අද වටිනාකම බැලුවොත් ඩිස්කවුන්ට් කරලා ඒක මිලියනයක් වෙයි. එහෙනම් අද වටිනාකම අපි ඩිස්කවුන්ට් කරලා ඒක අපේ රෙවෙනියු එක විදිහට recognize කරනවා. Right? Trade receivable, once you discount the 1.2 million, say it's 1 million, so the trade receivables gets debit 1 million, revenue gets credit 1 million. And that's how you do the counting. Thereafter, on an annual basis, you need to recognize the on an annual basis, you should recognize the interest income. So when it comes to interest income, that is simply the trade receivable account amount outstanding at the beginning of the period multiplied by the implicit interest rate and take that credit to the interest income. Practically, when the interval between the transfer of promised goods or the services and the payment by the customer is expected to be less than 12 months, it does not require to adjust for the effect of the time value of money. සාමාන්‍යයෙන් අපි සෙටල්මන්ට් එක අපි හිතමු මාස 3ක් වගේ ඇතුළත සිද්ධ වෙනවා. භාණ්ඩ විකුණන මාස 3ක් වගේ ඇතුළත සිද්ධ වෙනවා. නැත්නම් මාස 6ක්. එහෙම නැත්නම් අපි හිතමු මාස 12ක් කියලා. එතකොට ඒ වගේ කාලයක්, ඒ කියන්නේ අවුරුද්දක් ඇතුළත නම් මේ සෙටල්මන්ට් එක සිද්ධ වෙන්නේ ගොඩක් වෙලාවට අපි ටයිම් වැලියු එක කන්සිඩර් කරන්නේ නැහැ. ටයිම් වැලියු එක කන්සිඩර් කරන්නේ නැතුව අපි ඒක සේල් එක රෙකග්නයිස් කරනවා. එතකොට අපි 1 මිලියන් වලට වික්කේ අපි හිතමු මාස 3කින් ගෙවනවා කියලා කස්ටමර්. අපි කියනවා ප්‍රශ්නයක් නැහැ මිලියනයක් ගෙවුවාම ඇති. නැත්නම් මාස 6කින් ගෙවනවා ප්‍රශ්නයක් නැහැ මිලියනයක් ගෙවුවාම ඇති. ඒකට ඒ වගේ තත්ත්වයක්. අවුරුද්දක් ඇතුලේ නම් අපි මේ ටයිම් වැලියු එක ගැන ලොකුවට කන්සිඩර් කරන්නේ නැහැ. හැබැයි අවුරුද්දට වඩා වැඩි වෙනවා නම් you must consider about the time value. Let's put it through an example, then it would be more convinced. On 1st of April 2020, the SK PLC sold goods costing rupees 590,000 to a customer. The fair value of the goods sold is 900. So there it gives you the cost of the goods and the fair value of the goods. However, the customer agreed to pay rupees 1.89 million on 31st March 2022. The interest rate imputed and determined to be 10%. The interest rate implicit in the contract is 10%. If so, prepare the journal entries to record the revenue on 1st of April 2020 and 31st March 2021 and receivables on 2021 and 2022. Yeah. Okay. So let's do that. The revenue recognize කරන්න කියනවා 2024 එක සහ revenue එක නෙමෙයි ඒක 2021 3 කියන්නේ interest income එකක් revenue කියලා consider කරන්න එපා කොහොම වුණත් journal entries provide කරන්නකෝ පළවෙනි අවුරුද්ද අවසානයේ සහ දෙවෙනි අවුරුද්ද අවසානයේ. Let's start with the first one. What about the revenue that is to be recognized on 1st of April 2020? Considering the facts, you can work that out. So as soon as you get that, you can indicate your answer. Let's do one by one. Recognize your revenue as at 1st of April 2020. And that is the day on which you sell this, but you sell them on credit and you are ready to accept 1.89 million in 31st March 2022. So therefore, after 2 years time, you are ready to accept that much of money. ඒ වගේ මුදලක් අපි accept කරන්නේ අවුරුදු දෙකකට පස්සේ. So some little stories there. Let's look at that together. If you find it difficult, එක අපහසුයි වගේ නම් අපි බලමු එකටම. සරල කාරණාවක් තියෙනවා. The revenue එක recognize කරන්න ඕන අපි journal entries ඉල්ලන්නේ. We're supposed to provide the journal entries. Right. So it's about debits and credit. Right. Okay. So you know what is the journal entry? If you sell goods on credit. If you sell goods on credit, what is the journal entry? Trade receivables debit. ණයට බාර වික්කොත් අපේ journal entry එක මොකක්ද? Trade receivables debit වෙනවා, credit වෙනවා, revenue. මේකනේ අපේ journal entry. නම් මේ amounts දෙක තමයි අපිට හොයාගන්න තියෙන්නේ. ඒකට අපි කිව්ව time value එක අවුරුද්දකට වඩා වැඩි යන වෙලාවක time value එක significant, time value of money is significant. ඒ නිසා අපිට discount කරන්න වෙයි. ඒකට අපිට පේනවා අද බාණ්ඩ විකුණනවා. ඒ කියන්නේ 2024යි එක මේ අපි ඉන්නේ 1/4/2020. ඒකට අද දවසේ අපි revenue එක recognize කරන්න ඕන. revenue එක recognize කරන්නේ 5,90,000ක බාණ්ඩ විකුණන්නේ අද ඒක වික්කනම් අපි විකුණන්නේ ඒක 9 ලක්ෂයකට. හැබැයි මේ කස්ටමර් අවුරුදු දෙකකට පස්සේ කිව්ව නිසා අපි යාට කියනවා 1.89 මිලියන් ගෙවන්න කියලා. So time value එක significant නිසා අපිට මේක 1.89 මිලියන් එක discount කරන්න වෙනවා 1 plus interest rate එක 10% ලු ඒකෙන් අවුරුදු දෙකක් නේ. ඒතර මේ විදිහට discount කරලා තමයි අපි revenue එක recognize කරන්න වෙන්නේ. අපි ගත්තොත් 1.89 divided by 1.1 to the power 2. එතකොට අන්න අපිට එනවා අර අද අපිට වික්කනම් වටිනාකම වගේ. මේක තමයි ව්‍යාපාරවල reality එක. They are not ready to make losses. So they may even extend the credit facilities, but at the end of the day, they must be better off. So therefore, they would be ended up making that to the revenue that is equal to the cash sale. That is equal to the cash sale. So if you had sold that today, you would sell them for 900,000. So that is your revenue. Even if you accept this particular receipt in 2 years' time, still your revenue is equal to the cash price, 900. Credit, trade receivable, how much? The corresponding debit entry, 900,000. එහෙනම් ඔන්න අපි අපේ revenue එක recognize කරා කීයද? ලක්ෂ 9යි. trade receivables උත් ලක්ෂ 9යි. now ඔය entry එක තමයි අපි revenue එක recognize කරන්නේ. That is to recognize revenue. revenue එක recognize කිරීම. ඊට පස්සේ අපෙන් අහනවා 31st March 2020 revenue. revenue එක නෙමෙයි අතර මේක අපේ other income එක. right? මොකද trade receivables දැන් මම account එක just create කරලා පින්නුවත් පුතාලට just to show you the trade receivables account. Trade receivables. You can see that 900,000 is there at the beginning of the period. It comes from revenue. Today you are in 1st of April 2020. So can you remember that in case of provision that we do some unwinding of the liability? Something similar to that, here you need to do that, right? It's 900,000 for 1 year's time. You need to earn some interest income, and that interest income is going to be like 10%. So therefore, for the first year, you are earning 9,000 interest income. So trade receivable get debit 9,000, interest income gets credit 9,000. ඒකට අපි අර liability වල මතකද පුතාලට discount කරලා liability එක present value එකට ගත්තා. ඊට පස්සේ අපි ඒක unwinding කරා අවුරුද්දෙන් අවුරුද්ද. ඒකට ඒ වගේ දෙයක් තමයි මෙතන trade receivables වලටත් කරන්නේ. මුලින්ම discount කරා. දැන් අපි යන්න compound කරගෙන යනවා. මොකද අවුරුදු දෙක අවසානයේ ඒක මිලියන 1.89ක් වෙන්න ඕනේ. ඒක තමයි අපි charge කරන්න යන්නේ. So therefore, you have to recognize your revenue, not the revenue, income as at 31st March 2020. You can see that the debit entry goes to the trade receivables. How much? 9,000. Credit entry goes to the interest income. Interest income gets credit. How much? 9,000. That is to recognize interest income. Interest income එකක් තමයි අපි recognize කරන්නේ. ඊට පස්සේ මම පළවෙනි අවුරුද්දේ accounting අපි කරා. question එකේ කියන තව දෙයක් receivable balance එක අඳුර ගන්න කියලා නේ. What is the receivable balance at the end of the period? Balance carried forward. It's going to be now. පළවෙනි අවුරුද්ද අවසාන trade receivables වල වටිනාකම කීයද? 99,000යි balance carried forward වෙනවා නම් 99,000. එහෙනම් මේක තමයි අපි අරන් ගිහිල්ලා under the current asset පෙන්නන්නේ trade receivables කියලා. ඊට පස්සේ අපෙන් අහනවා ඊළඟ අවුරුද්ද අවසන් 2022ට අදාළව 2022 3.31 කොහොමද කියලා. දැන් අපි ඉන්නේ මෙතෙන්ට ආවම 1යි 4යි 2021 2021 4යි එක තමයි ඉන්නේ අපි 99,000යි right. ඊට පස්සෙත් අපි ආයෙ මොකද කරන්න ඕනේ? interest income එක recognize කරන්න ඕනේ. මේකට අපි ගමු 10%. 9,900. එහෙනම් ඊළඟ අවුරුද්දෙත් කියන්නේ අපි 2021 sorry 21 31යි 3යි 2022 බැලුවොත් trade receivables and interest income එක ඒ විදිහමයි entry එක දෙවෙනි අවුරුද්දට අදාළයි trade receivable තව 9,900කින් වැඩි වුණා interest income එක 9,900. එහෙනම් ඔන්න අපි දෙවෙනි අවුරුද්ද අවසානයේ ඇවිල්ලා බලපුවාම මේ දෙක එකතු කරලා බැලුවොත් අපිට තියෙනවා මිලියන 1.89ක් අපි හිතුවොත් කස්ටමර් සෙටල් කරා කියලා එයාගේ ආදායම එයාගේ outstanding මේ පොයින්ට් එකේ අපිට අන්න cash ලැබෙනවා. Cash gets debit, it gets credit. 1.89. එහෙනම් මම මේ cash settle කිරීමක් ගැන හිතලා entry එකක් provide කරොත් අපිට හම්බ වෙනවා cash 1.89 million 1.89. නම් මෙන්න මේ sorry සමස්ත ගනුදෙනුවටම අපි ඔන්න account කරා trade receivables. That's it. Settlement of cash. Settlement of cash by the customer. Now we cash settle kar. That's it. Yeah. 900,000 no in the ledger account of trade receivable. So isn't it 900,000 for opening balance of receivable? Right, so revenue should be 900,000 in the trade receivable account. So interest should be 90,000. Okay, would have made some mistake. Yeah, thanks. So here I have taken it says 90,000. No, it should be 900,000. Yes, very correct. Thank you very much for your observation. It should be 90,000. Yes, sorry for that. 90,000, 90,000. And the second thing should be also 990,000. 990,000. It's 99,000. Okay, thank you. Yes, very correct. 99,000. And finally, it's 1,089,000, right? 1,089,000. Yes, that's perfectly fine. Okay, so that's how we do that. Right. Revenue should be 900,000. Yeah, I have taken that. Now it's fine, right? Okay, so that's how we do the counting. So when there is time value of money. So just to show you the journal entry. So this is what we did. Initially recognize the revenue. Then also you could have even recognized the cost of sales. I haven't focused on that. You could have even recognized the cost of sales, the 90,000 finance income. You could have recognized. So interest income, finance income, whatever, it's fine. Receivable for the second year and finance income. And this is settlement of cash, 1,089. So that's what we do. तर අපිට ඇත්තටම cost of sales උත් අඳුර ගන්න තිබුණා නේද තාල? ඒක අපිට චුට්ටක් මගේ අරුණා. ඒකත් recognize කරමු for the sake of completion. तर මෙතන කියලා තියෙනනේ information එක. 5,90,000ක බාන්න කියලා. එතකොට 5,90,000ක බාන්න cost of sales expense එකක්. ඒක කීයක් වෙනවද? 5,90,000. Inventory 5,90,000. Inventory එකෙන් අඩු වෙලා cost of sales වලට මාරු වෙනවා. तर මේක තමයි අපි perpetual inventory system එක account කරන විදිය. When and where there is a sale, ඒත් එක්කම cost of sales අඳුර ගන්නවා නම් ඒකට අපි මොකක්ද කියන්නේ? Perpetual inventory system කියලානේ. එතකොට inventory account කරන systems දෙකක් තියෙනවා, periodic සහ perpetual. Periodic system එක නම් කාලච්ඡේදයක් අවසානයේ තමයි අපි cost of sales අඳුරගන්නේ. හැබැයි perpetual inventory system එක අපි sale එකක් වෙන්නේ කොතනද? එතනම cost of sales උත් අඳුර ගන්න. Right? So assuming a kind of perpetual inventory system, we are identifying the cost of sales to recognize cost of sales. Now it is complete, right? මේ transaction එකෙන් අපි ලාභයක් ලබලා තියෙනවා 3,10,000ක්. ලාභයක් ලබලා තියෙනවා අපිට පේනවා නේ. Yes. That's it. So for the day, it seems that that's all what we can discuss. So in the next class, we'll be taking the rest. So we have to start from step 4. Step 4 and 5 is left, and thereafter contract costs need to be discussed, and probably we would be able to complete that in the next class. So earlier we thought that our lectures would be there only for 1 week, but the faculty has taken a decision even to extend our lectures for the next year. So therefore, at the regular time, that is 8. So at 8 a.m. We'll be meeting next morning, Monday morning, right? Okay. Then see you in the next class. So we will discuss the rest in the next class, right? Then for the day, we can stop our discussion here. Okay. Thank you.